Well, time to get back to work. And thanks for joining me. First thing we gotta do, apparently, after holidays, is to mess up this shop a little bit. Floor's clean, everything's put away nice. I don't know if I can handle that. This is a big one though. They're all big ones, aren't they? I'm always excited, right? Every episode. And it is, because this is really cool. I've got the body welded to the chassis, right? The 06 Cadillac, underneath the 49 Chev now. And I get to start filling in the gaps between the two bodies and make everything match up. Basically, I have to go around the entire perimeter of the car and put in some little, some big pieces of 20 gauge steel and seal it all up. That's gonna be a ton of welding, because it's not just like one weld all the way around, right? Every time you put in a piece, it's two welds, and then sometimes across. So there's gonna be a lot of welding, but you know what? I get to just sit here and weld and think about other stuff, plan ahead for some of the other things. So let's get going on this. The breaker panel is behind this toolbox, and every morning when I come in, I have to open this up and turn on the power for the welders and the Step 2, drag out the welder. I love my little welder. Yeah, you know, watermelon in a can. And we're running 36-degree heat this week. You know, hottest I've ever welded in is probably, I think, 45 degrees Celsius in Kothragutam, India, helping the boys build a carport. And I only lasted a little while, and those Indian boys carried on. The coldest I've ever welded is on the Arctic Circle. It was minus 50 degrees Celsius. And you couldn't get enough clothes on. And you'd weld for about 10 minutes, and you'd run around to try and warm up, get some circulation going. We had the whole thing, we're building a big tank, had the whole thing hoarded. Propane heaters going like crazy in there. Yeah, it was crazy. Christmas. Christmas, I don't know what year that was. Well, I should know, because my son was born while I was up there. Anyway, if you're not a welder and you're looking to be one, I'd encourage you to do it. It's really quite simple and quite easy. There's a lot to know about welding, but that's only because there's a lot of different processes in welding and a lot of different metals that can be welded. But if you're just working on your car, you only got to know one way. And this is a MIG welder, so metal inert gas, wire feed, and it's got a big roll of wire on here because I go through quite a bit. It's 023 wire, so it's the fine wire, which is good for thin. The thinner the material you're welding, the thinner the wire that you want to use, and it's an argon, CO2 argon mix, I think. It just says argon. Anyway, it's got to be CO2 as well. You can use straight CO2 if you want, even out of a pop machine, but it'll spatter a little bit. Now this is the Weld Pack 180 amp welder. Runs on 220 volts. If you can't get 220 volts in your shop, then you need to go with probably a Weld Pack 140 or something. Now this is the Lincoln electric one, and it just happens to be NASCAR performance, which is just what I wanted. So 180 amps, which you don't want to go any bigger than that if you're going to be welding body panels. But the thing is, this one will weld other stuff. So I've welded chassis and axles and things like that. And you can use flux core wire instead of the gas. Now the flux core wire will give you better penetration. You wouldn't want to use that on body panels. It's just too hot, too hard to handle. But if you're trying to get penetration, like, you know, working on your chassis or whatever, I welded the front axle on my four-wheel drive truck, shortened the axle, right? And you just got to reverse the polarity when you use the flux core. and then you're good to go. And you can crank her up and you'll get some great penetration. Now on this one, Cadillac 49 Chev, 2 different kinds of steel. Well, yeah, it is. The Cadillac steel is really hard to drill. The drills just, they squeak and squawk, squawk, you know, where the old 49 is just like cold rolled steel, right? And the patch panels that I'm making is from sheets of cold rolled steel, so 20 gauge most of it. And so you want to go to a temperature that will burn it into the Cadillac steel, which is a little harder to weld because it's actually galvanized. And so you get a lot of bad smoke, poisonous smoke off it, and a lot of spatter, like it sputters and spatters. And the best way to do it, any welding, especially body panels, is make sure you're clear of all paint and grease and that kind of stuff. You really want to do that. It just makes it so much easier and so much less smoky. And I've got a ventilator system in the shop here so that it extracts the stinking smoke. But if not, just open the doors, you know, like don't subject yourself to a lot of that smoke. It's not healthy at all. When you're welding the Cadillac steel to the cold rolled steel, I found that cranking her up a little bit, cranking her up to number C. Now normally I would use B, which is the second up from coldest heat setting. And that's the number of amps that it's putting out, right? And then the other knob is the speed of the wire. And that's basically the only 2 things that are on there. It is the only 2 things. And then the amount of pressure you need about, I don't know, try it 5 pounds to 15 pounds in some cases, but mostly 5 pounds. You don't have any wind in here of shielding gas, and otherwise it burns up pretty fast. And again, that little bottle there is $117 plus tax. 117 bucks, can you imagine, for this little tiny tank? Well, you need it. But I found one thing interesting. If you're having a struggle with the welding, now you want to just spot weld it, just touch it, as you see in the videos. In fact, you probably get tired of looking at it, right? Bzz, 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 nice flash of light. That's to weld body panels, because you got to keep it cool. If you're welding on a body panel that shows, like on the outside of the car especially, you'd never want it to get any hotter than what you can hold your hand on. So you can cool it. Some guys use a wet rag, some guys use compressed air, whatever. I just have an air hose here, so it's easy. But underneath the car here, where I'm doing these inside of these wheel wells and that kind of stuff, I mean, I just welded it because it was so uncomfortable. I didn't have time to come back, because it takes hours actually to go a little dot at a time, and you don't put the dots together. You space them out and then come back and put one by the first dot and then another one by the next dot and that kind of thing, until you get a solid weld on there, and then you grind it off nicely, being careful how to grind it. And so it's probably best to use like a flap disc or something, a 60 grit, so that it's not too aggressive, and you be careful. You don't want to take the steel down. You only want to take the weld down. So I want to encourage you, yeah, get some kind of a welder. Now this one here is the weld pack. Okay, so in Canada it's like $700 on sale, $750 on sale or whatever. And there's another one that's exactly like it, that's called a MIG Dual or something like that. It looks just the same. But when you open it up, it has dual a lot of things. Better electronics, dual, I don't know, whatever it is, inverters or whatever it is that's changing the AC current into DC current, because it's DC that's coming out the other end there. Hey, that's why there's a polarity, positive and minus. This welder here, the cheap version, has a drive wheel and an idle wheel. And so the idle wheel just kind of goes along. The drive wheel's got a groove in it that the wire fits into, and that kind of grips it. And it works fine. Now the dual one has a little gear teeth, little gear kind of added to the inside of the wheel and the idler, so that the drive wheel actually drives the idler too. It's a really good idea, so simple. Don't know why they didn't put it on everything. But it really doesn't matter. I've never had a time when that didn't get enough grip. If you have problems and your wire gets stuck, it's going to be stuck no matter what, and it'll ball up in here if you keep pushing it. So if your wire stops, just look at the tip. It's probably melted into the tip or something. Use a pair of pliers and scrape it off or cut it or whatever. Bang it on the concrete, whatever it takes, and free it up, and it'll go again. Like, you know, very seldom do I have to stop and untangle a mess, and then you've got to actually clear the stinger of wire, weld wire, and then feed new wire through it. Just turn your gas off, turn it on high speed, get the wire feeding through the little feed roller and into the stinger, and just crank her through there. It takes a minute and it comes out the other end. Turn your gas back on, slow your speed down, and away you go. You're ready to weld again. The other challenge that you're going to have with welding is when you come across rust. And that's why I've cut so much of this car out, like major parts of it. I'd just rather cut it all out and put a whole new piece in and weld it to good steel. I just don't enjoy welding it to rust. It sputters and spatters and doesn't penetrate, doesn't stick actually. It just gobs up on top sometimes. So you want to do a good job, get rid of all of the rust, and yeah, you have a new car. Actually, there's hardly any watermelon in there. So where are we going to start? I'm thinking, just for being methodical, maybe we should start at the back and work our way to the front. Because I think I should work on it for a little while at the back where I don't actually have to take any of the braces out or anything, and just keep thinking about that a little bit. Because one of the next steps is to take all the braces out of the inside of the 49 Chev body and let it find its own place. But it's welded to the chassis now. But you don't want to do that unless you're really ready. So I'm going to start at the back, just do some kind of generic welding, putting pieces in places. The other thing about starting at the back is I get to put the mufflers up and put the exhaust system in place once I get those back pieces in. I can't do that right now. And so it's a bit of a nuisance because the mufflers are always hanging on the floor and you know, working under theirs. Yeah. So get that done. It's actually a fairly good step forward then if I can tighten up the entire exhaust system and have the mounts and everything there. You know, it's really cool getting jobs done, right? So we got to stick some pieces down in here. So we'll cut some pieces and make them. Then we're going to come up here, and then we're going to put the gas tank filler in here somewhere. I love this because you're making parts that you can't get anywhere else because of this, you know, special anomaly way of putting a car together. And so you've got to make panels that go from the 49 Chev body to the Cadillac chassis. So we're going to start with this one that goes over top of the muffler. It's basically a flat panel, except that it's got to be boxed up 2 inches because the mufflers have to go up inside. So the 49 Chev body is hanging a little low. If I'd have put it 2 inches higher, everything would have been flush under there. The trunk floor would have matched the old Cadillac floor and the mufflers would have fit up in there. But who wants your car 2 inches higher? So it's looking really good. I really like the height of it, but it's tight, man, getting these mufflers in there. The mufflers will fit no problem, but I got it to the point now where the mounts that hold the back mufflers, the rubber springer things, suspension things are just, I just can't get them in there the way they were. So I'm gonna have to turn something around. I don't know, maybe change the mounts on the actual muffler itself, move them ahead an inch. We'll get it. In a minute, we'll use the metal brake to bend, to do a 90-degree bend in some of these panels. But oftentimes, if it's just a small thing, I'll just clamp it to the bench and use the hammer, you know, pound it over to 90 degrees. It does a really nice job. You can't tell really the difference between that and the brake, especially if you're working on stuff that's under the car and nobody's ever going to see it. Not only because they're never going to look under there, but underneath there is going to be primed, painted, undercoated with that tarry stuff, right? So anything there would be covered. The inside is going to be covered with the sound deadening stuff, so nobody's ever going to see the panel again, right? So this is the panel that's up 2 inches, boxed up 2 inches, so the muffler fits up kind of inside of that. Yeah, there's a few of us willing to lay on our back and weld over top of our bare deck. If you're one of those, leave me a comment down there in the comment section, would you? I want to know how many people do stuff like that. or how many people would give up. Or you could jack the car up higher. That'd be a novel idea. Could weld up here to the Cadillac frame and down here to the Chev body. Now here's the trick to making pieces of steel that will fit into the areas that need to be filled. You get an eye for it eventually, but never an eye good enough, I don't think, to just look at a gap missing in the floorboards of the car and say, yeah, it needs to be this shape and draw it out, right? And cut it out of steel. So make it out of cardboard. It only takes a minute. We've been collecting cereal boxes for the last couple of months. And then you got a piece of steel that's going to fit in there perfectly. And when it fits in there perfectly, it's much easier to weld. You don't want to be closing gaps with the welder. It takes too long. You could do it, you know, if you got a small gap somewhere or whatever, just close it with the welder. But if you've got, like, say, 1/4 of an inch or 3/16 or something of a gap between the two pieces that you're trying to weld together, just find a sliver of steel and just hold it in there and weld it, right? Or if it's just a small gap, you can use a coat hanger and weld on top of the coat hanger, and the welder will melt the coat hanger, and it becomes more rod, right? So that it fills that gap easier and keeps the heat down so that it doesn't drop out. That's going to be the trick when you're welding this thin stuff. Hair too long on the trigger, and boom, it drops out. Big hole. And now you got to zit real gently and fill that thing in. Yeah, look at that. Isn't that cool? Now that whole tail end of that car has been rebuilt. So you can see the Cadillac part, the white part, and then the shiny steel part is the piece I just put in. And it connects to the cross member that I made, which then goes down, another piece goes down and out the back, which supports the tail pan of the car. And then we get to the inside of the fender wells, and that's interesting because the Cadillac is this weird shape, right? That you really need the cardboard for that, right? And make a pattern and then cut it out of steel. And I actually overlapped it just a little bit on the Chevy fender well, because trying to make a perfect butt weld there's no point to it. Like if it overlaps 1/8 of an inch, it's so much easier to weld. 2 reasons for that. One is that you got zero gap, and the other one is that you've got overlapping steel, which gives you more meat. And when you've got more meat, you've got more mass to collect the heat from the welder, so it's easier to weld and you can go faster. Now let's get to the actual fender well, the inside fender. It looks like fender tubs, right? It's just easier to make them square. And we'll get out the metal brake and put like a 1/2 inch 90-degree lip. Take it over to the shrinker. Now look what the shrinker does. Just a little bit of pressure and it sucks that into such a beautiful curve. And then you've got a perfectly shaped curve on there without any banging or pounding or bending or anything. And also notice that the camera always goes out of focus whenever I use the shrinker. Happens on every video, I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's black. One thing you can't forget is the gas filler tube. And that's the original position. I've cut it off where it comes up to the new fender well. And then we're going to drill a hole right there in that fender well. So a bit of measuring, figuring out where to cut it, because I actually have to put a twist in it so it goes into the trunk instead of out to the outside of the car on this one. I'm not going to vent it to the outside. I don't want to have it, I just want a nice smooth body there. I don't want to have to put a flap door or anything like that. I'm just going to leave it inside the trunk up high. And so I only cut the big pipe. I didn't cut the little breather pipe because it's a little harder to weld. So I can just kind of twist it around and bend it into the right shape later. So basically then straightened out this curve by cutting 1, 2, actually ended up 3 V's, flattening out a bit, and then welding it. Using the TIG welder on this because it works just like a torch, right? So you got a rod and an electric arc that works like a torch. And once it's all welded together, we will pressure test it before we believe it. And you get a lot more control than you do with the MIG welder. You can go a lot slower, faster, slow, a lot easier, right? But you can really watch the way the metal puddles in there, the melted metal, that it fills in the crack really well and that there's no pinholes or anything like that. So the idea is that the chances of a leak is much slimmer. Now, if you MIG weld it, you're going to be doing lots of fixing. All right, it takes a little back and forth to get it fit, to get it where you want it. And then I just used a couple of hose clamps and a little piece of angle iron to clamp it at the proper rotation, right, and place and everything that I wanted. The end result so that I could take it all out of the car and then weld it together and it'll fit perfectly. Now, the interesting thing about the Cadillac is the day before I took the zip blade, and started cutting it apart, my wife went and filled it up with gas. I think she thought that maybe if it was full of gas, I wouldn't work on it. So careful, very careful, all right? I'm working on this car the whole time with a tank full of gas. Now, a tank full of gas or an empty tank or mostly empty tank is not one more dangerous than the other. In fact, maybe the empty one's more dangerous because there's more fumes. It would be if it caught on fire because there'd be a lot more gas to burn. But you want to be very, very careful. So seriously, take the filler hose off, the vent hose off, plug both of those with something solid, hose clamp them on so that there's no way any fumes or anything can get out. But that's only half of it. The other half of it is this gas tank in the Cadillac goes all the way across the car underneath the steel where the back seat sits. And even like down the steel that comes down to the floorboards in front of the back seat, this gas tank right in behind there, you don't ever want to drill into that because you're going to drill into the gas tank. So you know that you have to take the entire rear end, independent suspension and everything off of the car to get the gas tank out. You don't ever want to have to do that. That gas tank is a lifetimer. So testing this pipe to make sure that there's no pinholes in it, you just use soapy water. All right, I just use some car wash soap and some antifreeze water or some radiator water, distilled water, because it's sitting on the shelf right there, right? Mix it up, use a paintbrush, paint it on there, put some air pressure in there, 10 pounds or whatever. And if there's any leaks, you'll see the bubbles come out and you know that you need to re-weld that spot. So there's where we got to. The underside of the fender well looks like that, all joined together. To me, that's absolutely beautiful because I've been looking at these two pieces, that big gaps, strange shaped gaps and curves that is going to be needed to match the two together. And now look at that, we've got it. So we're actually right from the very tail to the front of the back fenders. We're done completely up to there. So it's looking good from inside the trunk. There's that 2-inch rise where the muffler goes up underneath. Filled in totally tight across the back. And those round holes cut in the sides, hole saws are really handy. And they do such a nice job. And I just found the one the right size. I had to clean it out a little bit with the die grinder. So that the old Cadillac rubber boot that went through the floorboards of the fender well, I don't know, not sure where, to run the wires for the ABS brakes and the gas sending unit and all that kind of stuff, fits right in there. And then of course I had to cut those wires and I put plugs on them so they just all plug back together once you put them through those fender wells. And this is one where I thought I could have done it myself, maybe with a lot of tape and stuff, but hey honey, can you help me? So she's a good sport, as long as there's somewhere clean to sit. And hold the cardboard down and then I trace it underneath and then I cut it along the lines, trace it onto a piece of steel, put the steel in place, weld it, and away we go. We've got those both sides filled in. Clean up. I bet you I've removed 50 pounds, maybe even 100 of grinding dust, right? Grinding files out of this car and off the floor since I started the project. It's amazing how much steel just turns into grinding sawdust, I don't know, grinding dust, whatever you call it. So a good shop vac and you just keep cleaning it in an air hose and get that clean. And then we're going to spray paint this, epoxy prime it, and there we are, looking pro. And one more thing, stay hydrated. It's hot out. just traveling around in the last little while, now that it's summertime and people are kind of getting out again, and running across people who frequent car shows. Like, it's everywhere. I mean, you know, the internet is full of it. This car show and that car show. And there's some car shows that are just absolutely amazing. Over at Radium, BC there. Little wee town, you know, with more cars that come than the population. I'm sure like 900 cars come there every summer. And we were driving through there and a bunch of old guys sitting at a picnic table waved us over and said, "Hey, you ever come to the car show?" I'm 70 years old and I've never been to a car show. Well, I've walked through a couple, but never taken one of my cars. I've been driving hot rods since I was like 16, and I've never taken a car to a car show because I'm such an introvert. And it just doesn't seem like fun to me to sit in the lawn chair beside your car all day. I don't sit at the beach either. Even beautiful beaches, just stay away from them. But, so then why a YouTube channel? I think that's how introverts make friends. So make sure you subscribe and like the video or whatever it takes, you know. I don't know if there's notifications, whatever it is, but subscribe anyway so that you can keep up and we can be friends.